My name is Ava Collins, and I'm 34 years old. 10 years ago, my family cut me off when I escaped an abusive marriage. A marriage my father insisted I stay in to preserve our family's image. Last month, I returned home for his funeral, only to be mocked as a gold digger. They thought I came back to grab whatever I could from my father's estate. They couldn't have been more wrong. What they didn't know was that for the last 8 years, I'd been quietly paying for his care. No one suspected that the anonymous wire transfers keeping him alive came from me. And they had no idea about the video message my father recorded before he died, a message that would expose every lie they'd told about me for the past decade. If you've ever been unfairly judged by family or misunderstood by those closest to you, you'll understand my story. Like, comment, and subscribe so we can share these stories and support each other. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and I stepped onto the top floor of a gleaming glass tower in downtown Seattle. My pulse thudded in my ears as I approached the law offices of Hawthorne and Associates, where my father's will would be read. I was 5 minutes late, partly because of traffic, mostly because a part of me didn't want to face what was waiting inside. The reception area was crowded, a sea of black clothing and stiff postures. 22, maybe 23 family members were crammed into the space, whispering and shifting in their seats. Their conversations died the second they saw me. Every head turned. The silence hit me like a physical blow. I recognized most of them. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen since before my divorce. Some looked away immediately, guilt flickering across their faces. Others stared openly, their expressions a mix of curiosity and judgment. And then there was Victoria. My older sister sat in the front row, perfectly poised as always, her designer heels crossed at the ankle. Her lips curled into a smirk sharp enough to cut glass. "Well, well," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Look who finally showed up, the prodigal daughter. Or should I say, the gold digger? A few snickers rippled through the room. Heat rose up my neck, but I forced my expression to stay neutral. Giving her a reaction would be exactly what she wanted. Beside her, my older brother Daniel shook his head slowly, like he was deeply disappointed but not at all surprised. He didn't even bother to look me in the eye. I made my way to the back corner of the room and sat down, as far from them as possible. Whispers swirled immediately. 10 years, no contact. Now she comes back for the money. Single mother, probably broke. Their words cut deep, but I'd grown used to swallowing pain in silence. The glass door to the conference room opened, and Mr. Hawthorne stepped out, his silver hair catching the light. His eyes swept across the room, and when they landed on me, something flickered there, almost like he knew a secret, almost like he was waiting for this exact moment. And just like that, my chest tightened. Whatever was about to happen wasn't going to be simple. 10 years earlier, I had stood in my parents' living room, my newborn daughter, Lila, cradled tightly in my arms. My body still ached from giving birth, and fresh bruises marked my ribs where Ethan had kicked me during one of his rages. My father, Richard Collins, stood tall and unyielding, his jaw clenched in that familiar way that meant his decision was final. "If you leave him," he said, his voice cold as stone, "don't come back. Marriage is sacred. The family's reputation comes first." I had been shaking so hard, I could barely hold Lila steady. "Dad, please," I begged, tears spilling down my face. "He's hurting me. He's hurting our baby. I can't stay with him. Not another day." Behind my father, my mother wrung her hands in silence. Her eyes glistened, but she wouldn't meet mine. Not once. She didn't speak a single word in my defense. "People will talk, Ava," my father continued, his voice rising. "Do you want to shame us all? This family has a name to protect." My throat closed up. It felt like drowning. "You're choosing him over me," I whispered, disbelief making my voice break. "No," he said firmly. "I'm choosing the family. That was it." There was no compromise, no second chance. So I left. I walked out that night with nothing but a diaper bag, my wallet, and a baby who deserved better. The first year was a blur of survival. I slept on a friend's worn-out couch for 3 months, rocking Lila to sleep in the dark while listening to the city traffic outside. I worked 2 waitressing jobs, sometimes pulling 14-hour shifts, my feet blistered and aching. During the lunch shift at a rundown diner, I strapped Lila into a carrier and tied an apron over us both, taking orders while she slept against my chest. Not a single call came from my family. No texts, no visits. It was as if I'd been erased from existence. I would see Victoria's posts on social media sometimes. Photos of elegant dinners, vacations, and holidays at the house where I'd grown up. My face was missing from every picture, as though I'd never been part of their story at all. 5 years ago, a whisper from someone back home changed everything. An old neighbor reached out, letting slip that my father's health was failing. Heart problems, mounting medical bills. Victoria had been overheard complaining about how expensive his care was becoming. The news shattered me. For weeks, I wrestled with what to do. My father had abandoned me when I needed him most. But I couldn't abandon him in return. No matter how deeply he'd hurt me, finally, I made a decision. I set up a shell company to hide my identity and began sending $5,000 every month directly to cover his treatments. When a new experimental procedure came up that insurance wouldn't cover, I sold my car to pay for it. Lila and I ate instant noodles and thrift store groceries, while my father received the best private care money could buy. Every time I approved a transfer, I whispered to myself, family stands by each other. Even when they're wrong, I never told a soul, not even Lila. Back in the present, I gripped the edge of my chair in the crowded conference room. My siblings were already whispering their narrative, rewriting history in front of 20 pairs of eager ears, but they had no idea what I'd done, no idea what was coming, and when the truth surfaced, it would shatter their perfect, poisonous story forever. The conference room was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a sweeping view of downtown Seattle. But no one was paying attention to the skyline. Every eye in the room was locked on Mr. Hawthorne, who stood at the head of a long mahogany table, his hands resting on a stack of neatly organized documents. I sat near the back, perched on a narrow chair pushed against the wall. 22 family members filled the space, their faces a mixture of anticipation, calculation, and barely concealed greed. Victoria, naturally, had claimed a seat at the very center of the table, right beside Daniel. She sat with her spine perfectly straight, her designer blouse pristine, while Daniel leaned back, exuding casual authority, as though this was just another board meeting he was destined to lead. Mr. Hawthorne cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. Before we begin, I'd like to thank everyone for coming today, he said, his tone calm but commanding. Your father, Richard Collins, left very clear and specific instructions regarding these proceedings. We will be following them to the letter. Victoria smiled tightly, her manicured fingers drumming on the polished wood. Daniel gave a small nod, as if confirming that everything was under control. Mr. Hawthorne adjusted his glasses and began reading from the top sheet in his folder. First, I will provide a summary of Mr. Collins' estate. A few relatives leaned forward eagerly. Hungry for numbers? The family residence on Westlake Drive is currently valued at $2.4 million, Hawthorne announced. Victoria's lips curved upward ever so slightly. Daniel's eyes glimmered with satisfaction. In addition, Mr. Collins held an investment portfolio consisting of stocks, bonds, and various mutual funds, with a total value of $5.8 million as of last Friday's market close. There was a collective gasp from several cousins. Even I felt my stomach twist. I'd known my father was successful, but I hadn't realized the true scale of his wealth. There are also additional assets, Hawthorne continued, including a lake cabin near Mount Rainier, 2 luxury vehicles, and various collectibles. Altogether, the total value of Mr. Collins' estate stands at approximately $8.5 million. A murmur rippled through the room like a wave. Aunt Joanne actually clutched her pearls. Victoria and Daniel exchanged a look that spoke volumes. A silent conversation of triumph. I didn't need to hear the words to know what they were thinking. It's ours. All of it. I stayed silent, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Let them dream. Now, Hawthorne said, his tone sharpening, before we move to the reading of the will, there is another matter we must address. The shift in his voice immediately caught my attention. The room quieted again, tension thick in the air. Mr. Collins left behind special instructions to be carried out before the will is read, Hawthorne explained. These instructions take precedence over everything else, including the division of assets. Daniel frowned. Special instructions? He repeated, like the phrase itself was an inconvenience. Yes, Hawthorne said simply. From his leather briefcase, he withdrew 2 objects and set them carefully on the table. A sealed envelope marked with an official notary stamp and a USB drive in a clear case. Even from where I sat, I recognized my father's bold, familiar handwriting across the envelope. My heart lurched painfully in my chest. Hawthorne's expression was unreadable as he looked around the table. "These will explain everything," he said quietly. A cold hush settled over the room, and I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. Whatever was inside that envelope, whatever was on that drive, was about to change everything. The sight of that sealed envelope and USB drive was like a spark dropped into dry kindling. The room, already tense, ignited in an instant. Victoria shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice cutting through the murmurs. Before we waste time on whatever that is, she gestured at me with a perfectly manicured hand. "We need to address the obvious question. Why is she even here?" The words she dripped from her mouth like poison, as though saying my name would taint her. "I have just as much right to be here as you do," I said evenly, though my throat felt like it was closing. Victoria let out a sharp laugh, the kind that made my stomach twist. "You disappeared for 10 years, Ava. 10 years. Not a single phone call, not one visit, not even when Dad almost died after his first heart attack. And now you waltz back in conveniently after his funeral? You expect us to believe you're here for anything other than money?" Murmurs of agreement rose around the table. "Exactly," Aunt Joanne chimed in, leaning forward like a vulture closing in on prey. "She abandoned him, abandoned all of us." Daniel, still seated but with his jaw tight, added his voice to the attack. "She forfeited her right to this family when she walked away. She wasn't there for Dad, wasn't there for anyone, and now she thinks she can take a share of what we worked so hard to maintain." "Worked so hard?" I repeated quietly, my fists clenching in my lap, but Victoria wasn't done. She took a step closer, her heels clicking like gunshots against the floor. "Let's be honest, shall we? You've always been irresponsible, running away from your marriage, from your duties, playing the victim while everyone else cleaned up your mess. You couldn't even keep a stable job. Everyone knows you've been struggling, Ava, a single mom, barely scraping by." Her gaze swept over me with a look of practiced disdain. "You need this money. You came here for it." "Gold digger," someone muttered from the back. The words stung like a slap. My breath caught, but I forced my face into a mask of calm. Inside, I was breaking apart, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. They didn't know the truth. Not yet, so I stayed silent. And my silence unnerved them more than any outburst ever could. Victoria's voice rose to a shrill pitch. "I demand that her legal standing be reviewed. She has no claim here." The room dissolved into chaos. Voices overlapped, accusations flying like knives. That's when Mr. Hawthorne moved. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Enough. The single word cut through the noise like a blade. Everyone froze, his expression hardened. "Let me be perfectly clear," he said slowly. "Any interruption during these proceedings will result in immediate forfeiture of inheritance. If you cannot remain silent and respectful, you will be escorted out. And your claim will be void." The threat hung in the air like a guillotine. Victoria sank back into her seat, pale with fury. Mr. Hawthorne gave the room one last sweeping glance, then turned to the laptop. "Now," he said, his finger hovering over the trackpad, "let's hear what your father had to say." And with that, he pressed play. The screen flickered to life, and there he was, my father. Richard Collins looked smaller than I remembered, frail and drawn, his once powerful shoulders hunched beneath a gray sweater. His skin was pale, almost translucent, but his eyes were sharp and unflinching, like they had been on the day he'd banished me. The sight of him stole my breath. For 10 years, I had lived with that face only in memories and nightmares. And now here he was, staring at me through the screen, speaking from beyond the grave. He cleared his throat, his voice raspy but steady. "Before anything else," he said, looking straight into the camera, "I must apologize. To Ava." The room froze. A collective gasp rippled around the table. Victoria's mouth dropped open. Daniel's head snapped toward me like I'd just set the building on fire. I sat perfectly still, my nails digging into my palms. "I failed you, Ava," my father continued, his voice trembling slightly. 10 years ago you came to me, terrified, desperate, holding your baby girl. You told me what Ethan was doing to you. The bruises, the threats, the fear that never left you. A strangled sound escaped Aunt Joanne's throat. "I saw those bruises with my own eyes," he said, shame lacing every word. "And do you know what I did? I chose to protect our family name instead of protecting my daughter. I told you marriage was sacred. I told you leaving would disgrace us. I told you, if you walked out that door, You shouldn't come back." Whispers broke out around the table, shocked and disbelieving. Someone actually started crying. I was wrong, my father said, his eyes glistening. So terribly, unforgivably wrong. You were brave enough to leave that man, to save yourself and your child. And I punished you for it. I turned my back when you needed me most. Across the table, Victoria's face drained of color. She lowered her gaze, suddenly fascinated by her own hands. Daniel stared straight ahead, unblinking, his jaw tight. "You all need to hear this," my father continued, his voice gaining strength. "Ava didn't abandon this family. I abandoned her. And for a decade, you all allowed that lie to spread. You whispered behind her back, called her selfish, heartless, a gold digger." My breath caught. The words I'd been forced to swallow for years now hung in the air like smoke. "But here's the truth," he said, leaning closer to the camera. "For 8 years, while the rest of you visited me for appearances, someone was quietly paying for my care. The surgeries, the private nurses, the specialists. I never knew who it was at first. Just anonymous wire transfers, arriving every month without fail." The room stirred again. Daniel frowned deeply. Victoria's brow furrowed in confusion. "It wasn't just a little help," my father added. "It was everything. Over $500,000 given in silence. No one asking for recognition. No one demanding thanks." Mr. Hawthorne clicked his laptop, and suddenly the screen split in two. On one side, my father continued speaking. On the other, bank statements appeared. Rows of deposits, $5,000, $8,000, even $20,000 at a time. Gasps echoed through the room. "These are the transfers," my father explained. "Month after month, year after year, until finally I hired a private investigator to trace them." He paused, his expression softening. The truth broke me. The camera zoomed slightly closer as his voice dropped to a whisper. "It was Ava, the daughter I cast out. The one you all condemned. While she worked 2 jobs to raise her little girl, she was the one keeping me alive. She sold her car to pay for one of my surgeries. She sacrificed everything, and she never once asked for anything in return." The room went utterly silent. Even Victoria's sharp tongue failed her now. Daniel's face had gone completely blank, but the muscle in his jaw twitched violently. My father's gaze burned into the camera. "While some of you came to my bedside for photographs and social appearances," he said bitterly, "Ava's love came quietly, without witnesses or applause. That, my children, is what true family looks like." Tears blurred my vision. My heart ached so badly I could hardly breathe. Mr. Hawthorne's hands rested on the table, steady but tense, as my father's image began to fade slightly. "And so," my father said, his final words echoing in the room, "I made certain arrangements to make things right. James," he nodded toward Mr. Hawthorne, "will now open the amendment to my will." The screen went black. The room stayed silent for a beat, like everyone was too stunned to move. Then Victoria let out a low, broken sound. Daniel slammed his hand against the table. Aunts and uncles gasped, whispering frantically. I sat frozen, my pulse roaring in my ears. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. The balance of power in this family had just shifted forever. Mr. Hawthorne's hands were steady as he reached for the sealed envelope. The thick paper tore with a crisp rip that echoed through the conference room. Every head leaned forward, anticipation stretching the silence taut. He unfolded the document carefully and began to read in a clear, measured tone. "This is the official amendment to the last will and testament of Richard Collins, executed 6 weeks prior to his passing, in the presence of 2 witnesses and a notary." Victoria shifted in her chair, her face pale and tight. Daniel crossed his arms, jaw set like stone. Mr. Hawthorne continued, 80% of my estate, including the family home on Westlake Drive, my primary residence, and the majority of my investment portfolio, shall go to my daughter, Ava Collins, and her daughter, Lila Collins. The words hung in the air for a beat before the room exploded. "What?" Victoria's scream tore through the silence like a siren. She surged to her feet, knocking her chair backward with a crash. "This is a joke. A cruel, twisted joke?" Daniel's face darkened to a deep red. "This isn't legal," he barked, pointing a trembling finger at Mr. Hawthorne. "She manipulated him. We'll fight this. I'll have our lawyer file a challenge first thing in the morning." Gasps and murmurs swirled through the crowd of relatives. Some were shocked, others delighted by the drama unfolding before them. Mr. Hawthorne didn't flinch. His calm, authoritative voice sliced through the chaos. "Sit down, both of you." Victoria froze, momentarily stunned by his sharp tone. Your father was very clear, he continued. The amendment states that any beneficiary who contests the will in court will forfeit their inheritance entirely. That includes the $50,000 each of you has been allotted, along with the box of family photographs and personal mementos designated for you. You're bluffing, Victoria spat, am I? Mr. Hawthorne lifted the document slightly so everyone could see the bold legal clause printed near the bottom. It's right here in black and white. If you challenge this amendment, you walk away with nothing. Victoria's face twisted in fury. She sank back into her chair, trembling with barely contained rage. Daniel wasn't so easily cowed. She doesn't deserve any of it, he snarled, pointing at me like I was an intruder. She wasn't here when Dad was sick. She didn't care until there was a payday involved. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady, but my voice strong. You're wrong. The room fell silent again. I never wanted his money, I said, each word deliberate. I didn't send those payments to buy favor or to inherit anything. I did it because he was my father. Even when he turned his back on me, I couldn't turn my back on him. My voice wavered, but I pushed through. I'll keep the house. For Leela. She deserves to know where her grandfather lived, to have that connection to her family history. But everything else, you can have it. I don't need it. I don't want it. I turned to face my siblings fully. But understand this, you are not welcome in our lives. Not now, not ever. You spent 10 years spreading lies about me while I stayed silent. That ends today. My daughter will grow up safe and free of your poison. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Daniel's hands balled into fists. You'll regret this, he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. Victoria glared at me with eyes full of venom. This isn't over, she spat. They stormed out together, their footsteps echoing down the hall like a final threat. But deep down, I knew it was only the beginning. 6 months after the day everything changed, the house on Westlake Drive no longer felt like the cold, distant place I'd grown up in. Gone were the heavy curtains and stiff, expensive furniture my father had favored. The echo of judgment that used to live in these walls had been replaced with warmth and laughter. The rooms were filled with cozy couches, family photos, and the scent of cookies baking in the kitchen. Lila's art hung proudly in the hallway, splashes of color where there used to be only muted grays. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was home. Lila was thriving in her new school. Therapy was helping her work through the chaos she'd been dragged through. From the instability of our old life to the whirlwind of the will reading. Every week, I saw her grow more confident, more secure. She laughed more freely now, her smile no longer shadowed by fear or uncertainty. We had a new tradition, too, monthly family dinners. Only those who had shown genuine remorse for how they treated me were invited. Aunt Joanne came regularly, bringing her legendary peach cobbler and tearful apologies. Cousin Mark often arrived early to help fix things around the house, his way of making amends. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by family who truly cared. Not because of blood, but because of choice. With part of my inheritance, I started something I dreamed of for years, the Collins Hope Fund, a scholarship program for women leaving abusive relationships. The irony wasn't lost on me. Victoria and Daniel had both tried to contest the will, ignoring Mr. Hawthorne's warning. When their case was dismissed, they not only lost the battle but also forfeited the $50,000 each they had been promised. Their lost inheritance became the seed money for the fund. I smiled when I signed the first scholarship check. It was as if their greed was being transformed into something good, something healing. The first recipient was a young mother with 2 children, escaping a situation painfully similar to mine 10 years earlier. The consequences for Victoria and Daniel didn't stop there. Victoria's real estate business collapsed within 3 months. Word travels fast in Seattle, and when people learned how she'd lied about caring for our father while attacking me publicly, clients dropped her one by one. 2 of her business partners walked away, leaving her scrambling to salvage what was left. Daniel's downfall was quieter, but just as brutal. His investment firm began bleeding clients after whispers spread about his behavior during the will reading. In finance, reputation is currency, and his had been shattered. Even his closest partners began distancing themselves, leaving him isolated. Just when I thought they couldn't sink any lower, Victoria crossed a line I couldn't ignore. One afternoon, the school called me. She had shown up during Lila's recess, cornering her near the playground and trying to convince her that I had stolen her inheritance. I was at the school within minutes. Seeing Lila's tear-streaked face as she clung to me was all the proof I needed. The judge didn't hesitate to grant a 2-year restraining order against Victoria. It was the final boundary, carved in stone. As I sat in the living room one quiet evening, watching Lila play with a puzzle, I reflected on how far we'd come. Family, I'd learned, isn't defined by bloodlines or last names. It's built through actions, sustained through respect, and sometimes protected through distance. Lila asked me recently, "Mom, why do people hurt the ones they're supposed to love?" I hugged her and said, "Sometimes people let fear and pride guide them instead of love. But we get to choose how we respond. We get to build a different kind of family." And we had. To anyone listening who has ever been the black sheep, who has had to walk away from toxic family ties to save themselves, I want you to know something. You are not alone. Comment and subscribe to share your story. Let's create a community of healing, a place where choosing yourself isn't seen as selfish, but as necessary. The $8.5 million didn't change me. It revealed everyone else. And in that revelation, I found peace.